or Canada or internationally, Charlie's case from Puerto Vallarta. We're definitely pleased you can all be here tonight in this unprecedented time where we try to find virtual connections in COVID. We dearly miss all of you and seeing you in person, and we're very excited to welcome you back into our facility in larger numbers. However, we still are open on the weekends, and we have you can visit our website. You can sign up to visit our community aquarium, the Nicholas Sontag Marine Education Center. This talk is presented by the Gibson's Marine Education Society, which operates the center. Our society's vision is to support an educated community that actively cares for the ocean's health. We accomplish our vision by engaging in conservation efforts, such as our Healthy Harbor partnership with the town of Gibson's. We deliver K-12 education programs on the Sunshine Coast in partnership with Department of Fisheries and Oceans through their Stream to Sea Salmon in the Classroom program and the Sunshine Coast Regional School District number 46. And our community programming is bringing events like this to you tonight, and we're just going to keep building. We're headed into year 5. This is a real thing. Year 4 being kind of open to the public, but year 5. So this is fantastic. I have a little introduction I wrote for Fiona. Fiona is a passionate marine conservationist, currently pursuing a doctorate in zoology at the University of British Columbia, where she is collaborating with community, Indigenous, and government partners to understand how the Salish Sea is adapting to climate change and other anthropogenic pressures. That means human-caused pressures. I think actually Fiona wrote that part, but this is the part that I wrote. We've been fortunate to work with Fiona with the Salish Sea Nearshore Habitat Restoration Project. So for those that you don't know, this past fall, our scientific dive team performed an eelgrass cleanup right here at Gibson's Harbor with support from the Pacific Salmon Foundation as part of our Healthy Harbor partnership with the town of Gibson's. But this was really part of a larger project that Fiona had helped coordinate in the region of Howe Sound. And after this one-day community education and engagement event, Fiona coordinated the Sea Change Marine Conservation Societies, which is another charity organization, a great one, their dive team to come in and remove even more debris and lots of larger objects that we'd helped mark with GPS in the harbor. So it was a collaborative event that really was a good step towards restoration of eelgrass, which is a key species in the Howe Sound for many reasons, which we may learn about. Additionally, we were fortunate to have built on Fiona's work with the eelgrass mapping of the Howe Sound as project director for Make Way, another one of her hats that she wears, many hats she has, which helped inform our subtitle surveys and natural asset monitoring programs here in Gibson's. So we're a huge fan of the work that Fiona's done, her expertise, vision, and especially her collaborative attitude, because it's helped us grow our programs and our impact. And from what I understand, and it may be more than this, but today Fiona is going to discuss the importance of mobilizing community knowledge to protect ocean health, what we all care about, culture and livelihoods in Howe Sound, and I will let her correctly pronounce the Squamish place name. Fiona, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Victoria and Graham, for that intro and for hosting this talk series. Like I mentioned, it's a thrill to get to speak with you all and to continue our community engagement and our connection to place and ocean through this incredibly tumultuous time that COVID has imposed on all of us. So I'm going to share my screen now. Just give me a quick minute. And can you see the presentation? It's all good?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm really excited to get to speak with you all tonight and share this evening of storytelling about a place that's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to lots of yours as well, Howe Sound at tl'ka7tsem, which is one of the 3 Squamish Nation place names for this region. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of this region's ocean, dive into learning about a few key species, that one of which Graham already mentioned, eelgrass, and learn about some of the actions that we can take as community members and as organizations or stakeholders or governments, actions we can take to protect what we love in the face of growing pressures and changes. And as Victoria mentioned at the beginning, tl'ka7tsem, Howe Sound, is within the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation and overlaps with the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Lil'wat, and Sechelt nations. So I invite you all, this is a Zoom talk, so I invite you to please pop into the chat where you're joining from so that we can get a sense of, you know, are you from Gibson's? Are you from Vancouver? Outside of Canada? And if you know whose territories you're joining from, that would be great to pop in there as well. And please do put questions in the chat as well throughout the talk, or comments if you have any. That way we can really make sure it's as dynamic a experience as possible. So before going into Howe Sound, I thought I'd give you a quick little personal background on myself. I grew up in Vancouver and I spent a lot of my childhood on Bowen Island, tl'ka7tsem, which is the Squamish Nation place name for Bowen. And I feel so grateful to have that exposure to this region's ecology growing up and getting to explore the rocky shores and the forests. That is what has impacted the direction and the work that I'm doing right now very strongly. I went away to Montreal to do my undergraduate degree, and then when I came back, I got to start working in this region, which was incredible. I worked with the OceanWise research department, and that's when I started to meet the people in this region. As a kid, I didn't really know that much about the community, and over the past 4 or 5 years, I've loved getting to know the people who live in this area and all of the diverse actions that people are taking to steward the ocean. And then a few years ago, I started grad school at UBC. So I'm studying now in the zoology department and looking at how climate change is impacting coastal ecosystems along BC and communities in Howe Sound. So I'm happy to speak to any of that afterwards. Now, before we zoom in too deeply into Howe Sound, I want us to zoom out a little bit and take a look at the broader picture of where we are in this region. So Howe Sound is this deep water fjord outlined in red here, this purple circle more or less, and it sits almost smack dab in the middle of the Salish Sea, which is the inland body of water that crosses the Canada-US border and connects the Strait of Georgia to the Puget Sound throughout the Juan de Fuca Strait and into the Northern Pacific Ocean. The blue line here is all of the watersheds that flow into the Salish Sea. So this region is incredibly complex. It has a whole bunch of different jurisdictional boundaries and activities that impact ocean health. But what I want you to remember when we talk about the ocean, one of the main differences to land is that the ocean is made up of water. And that glorious medium means that it's incredibly connected. So the fish that leave the Squamish estuary and swim out through the habitat in Howe Sound into the Strait of Georgia, they don't really care about the government boundaries that they're crossing or even the national and international boundary that they cross when they go out into the Pacific. It's just water. And so as humans, we like to compartmentalize our activities, but let's remember that it's quite connected and to try to expand our horizons beyond the little zones that we tend to operate within. So that being said, diving back into Howe Sound, as Victoria mentioned, this region is within the Squamish Nation's territory. tl'ka7tsem is one of the 3 Squamish Nation place names for Howe Sound, and what it means is paddling from Squamish, which was where this picture was taken, out through the Sound into the Strait of Georgia. So traditionally, the nation used the water as their main transportation route to journey between villages in the upper portion of their territory to the ones throughout Howe Sound and down into Vancouver. And I've been extremely appreciative over the last few years through my work to build a working relationship and relationships with members of the Squamish Nation and to learn from them as I develop as a scientist who's connected to this place as well. And I wanted to share one of the lessons that I learned a couple years ago when I was in a workshop with some youth members of the nation when we were talking about the life around us. So as a settler who grew up in kind of a colonial and settler context, we often refer to the species around us, like salmon and trees and plants, as resources, distinct from humans and kind of meant for providing benefits to us and to our society. But Johnny, who is one of the youth who I work with from the Squamish Nation, he reminded, they don't think of these species as just resources or species, it's life, they're relatives. and they're much more connected and relational in that way. So that message, it really resonated with me because it kind of takes us out of our us and them perspective, and it makes us think of us moving through the world in a much more interconnected way. And I think it's very important if we're researchers, if we're practitioners, if we're working out on the land and in the waters to remember that connection and that respect that that connection then entails. So just extending my gratitude to the members of the nation who I've gotten to work with. Now, Howe Sound is an incredible place, and over the past several decades, it's gone through this incredible resurgence. The region today is thrumming with life and vitality, with ecological richness, incredible marine species, and we're seeing also a cultural resurgence and a change in the way that our communities are connecting to the ocean. I'll go through that a little bit later. But the region was not always this way. And for those who've lived in the Sound for a while, you'll remember not so long ago when this area was a little bit of a dead zone. So for the bulk of the 20th century, Howe Sound's waters were largely devoid of life. They were not thrumming with life and culture. And that was largely due to the cumulative impact of a number of different industrial activities in this region. Most notably the Britannia copper mine, which operated from 1904 to 1974 and was responsible for leaching a lot of acid effluent into the Sound's water, which effectively killed a lot of the marine life in that area. In particular, the marine life at the base of our food web, plankton and those smaller creatures. So the water quality was pretty bad. It did not support a lot of marine life. Other human activities such as pulp and paper mills and the chemical plant up in Squamish and log booming along the shorelines all kind of contributed to this decline in ecological health. But thankfully, over the past few years, over the past few decades rather, we've seen that some of this industry has closed down. Some of the industry has put a lot of energy into treatment plants to improve their practices to have a smaller environmental impact. And that's led to this really incredible recovery that we're seeing that's being manifested particularly in the return of charismatic marine mammals to our region. So we're seeing orca, Pacific white-sided dolphin, and humpbacks on a regular basis now, which is incredible. I hear some people in West Howe Sound during the summer months, they say it's like clockwork when they can expect to see transient orca passing along the waterfront, which is just so cool. And the neatest thing to me about that is the return of marine mammals signifies something greater than just them. If we look at this food web of the marine food web in Howe Sound, marine mammals are way up at the top here. And their presence indicates that all of the species below them are improving and are doing well, particularly the species that they eat and the species that eat what they eat. And so I just want to draw attention to forage fish, because that's another species that we've been seeing a return of in this region, of northern anchovy and herring spawning. So that's really exciting. And yeah, when you see an orca, it's not just the orca that's the message, it's that broader picture of marine health. And this wave of recovery and revitalization is also leading to an increase in the attention and stewardship and care that the communities who live in this area are demonstrating for this region's ocean. So I feel super grateful to have gotten to come back to Howe Sound in 2016 during this recovery period and to get to kind of ride that wave of excitement and optimism. As a marine biologist, it's pretty sad to learn about the state of the world's ocean. For the large part, the ocean is not a happy story right now. There's a ton of declines in biodiversity. There's so much pollution. Climate change is wreaking havoc, fisheries, all sorts of pressures. But Howe Sound is a happy story for the most part. And I like to kind of maintain that sense of optimism as much as possible. That being said, there are new pressures to this region. So I kind of walked through a little bit about that industrial past and the impact that it had. Now we're entering a new era in this region. And this photo kind of highlights what that era is being characterized by. So we have here the Sound at tl'ka7tsem, and right here, Vancouver, West Vancouver, this big metropolis, one of, like the biggest human density in our province. And we're seeing this spillover effect, especially over the past few years, as more people are discovering the sound and coming here to live and to recreate and to explore. So that's leading to a new suite of pressures, and those that are most likely aligned with coastal development. So we see tons of visitation to the parks, and that can lead to more human wildlife encounters, as well as people who are moving here. So this graph, these graphics are both from the 2017 Ocean Watch report, and they kind of highlight the change in population that's happening in this region. Squamish is one of the fastest growing districts in the country, and the parks are receiving a ton of visitation. So it's this shift in pressures from industrial to, urbanization, I'd say. So that's something to be aware of. And then we also have climate change. So I don't know about you all, but it was around 3 years ago, I'd say, when I first really felt the impacts of climate change in this region. So this is a picture that I took a year and a half ago in August of 2019, in the middle of the Sound, looking up toward Enville Island, and then Squamish is up there. And this is a picture, this should say 2018, I just realized. So 1 year prior, kind of in the same part of the water, but this time on the ferry over to Bowen, looking back toward West Vancouver, and I can barely see the mainland. This is not that far, but the air was so dense with the forest fire smoke that I couldn't see the mainland. It was so stark, that difference between being able to see so far away and then all of a sudden not so far away. And this is a picture closer to Gibson's. So this is boating from Bowen over to Gibson's in September of this past year, when we had that similar spell of a couple of weeks of really dense forest fire smoke. And it really hit home, climate change is happening. It's not in the future, it's happening right now. It has been happening, and it is having a really direct effect on marine life. So with the forest fire smoke, we were breathing this polluted air. That's kind of similar to marine organisms that are experiencing ocean acidification, where the seawater is becoming corrosive. The environment that they're living in is changing, and it's negatively impacting their health and well-being. I've pulled up a few pictures of some species that are not doing so well in the Sound. So I spoke about that recovery, the marine mammals, the forage fish, but there's quite a few species that are pretty low abundance in this region relative to elsewhere on the coast. So rockfish, for example, we can see a quillback rockfish back here. The abundance of rockfish in Howe Sound is very low relative to elsewhere on the coast. So low that there's been a ban on fishing rockfish throughout the whole region, all of fishing area 28, for many years now, because the population's not recovering. Lingcod are also banned from fishing. So you're not allowed to fish for lingcod because their abundance is pretty low. This beautiful creature here is called glass sponge reef. And this is our equivalent to coral reefs. So these sponges build these aggregate structures that create this incredibly complex habitat for fish and invertebrates to live. But glass sponges, their name is glass sponge because they build their skeleton out of silica, and they're quite fragile. They're like glass. So they're vulnerable to any fishing gear being dropped on them, and anybody accidentally touching them if they're diving. They're also quite vulnerable to climate change and to ocean warming and acidification, because they like stable temperature, stable seawater temperature, and any slight changes can really affect their health. And then over here we have marine birds, and I would love to point you towards the Ocean Watch 2020 report, which Dr. Aroha Miller presented on in the December lecture series, if you want to learn more about any of these species and what their current status is, because there's so much cool local data in those reports. So that's a little bit of the summary of the history of this region: industrial past, late recovery, a new suite of pressures, and some species that are doing well, some species that are still not doing well. So we're not out of the dark yet. We have a lot of work to do to continue to protect those species. And that brings me to the next kind of portion of this presentation, when we're going to talk about that. How can we protect the health of our ocean and our communities? Because we care about a healthy ocean, and we want to make sure that everybody now and in the future has the ability to access and enjoy a healthy ocean. Everybody, including humans and non-humans. So I'm going to walk through two projects. Graham kind of alluded to both of them. And the central theme of both of those projects is connecting knowledge, research, and community knowledge to action. Rather than just generating research for the sake of research that doesn't really go anywhere, I want to make sure that any knowledge that we're producing in this region is directly connecting to action. So in Aroha's presentation, she walked through the Ocean Watch report that was published last year, which is incredible. Highly advise reading it. And that report was based off of a report that was published in 2017 by the same organization, OceanWise's Research Institute, that had an action plan. So the Ocean Watch reports review what we know about various ecological and human indicators associated with the ocean. They synthesize data, and then they generate this action plan of, okay, this is what we know. Based off of that, what should we do? So in 2017, the first action on this plan was to create a marine guide that brings together information about this region's ocean into one unified source or tool that can inform community education and marine planning. So that action inspired local governments and communities in this region to come together and to create a project called the Howe Sound tl'ka7tsem Marine Reference Guide, which is what I've been involved in since 2017. And this project is on Makeway's shared platform, and I can share more information about how to learn more about it after the talk. But essentially, the whole goal of this initiative is to build our capacity to protect, restore, and be stewards of the diverse natural and human values associated with the Sound's water. That's kind of a jargony way of saying that we want to create research that informs our ability to protect and restore the region's ocean. And we do this in three main ways. We conduct research and create tools like maps and reports about the region's oceans. We try to fill knowledge gaps. And some of those knowledge gaps were identified by the Ocean Watch report. The second way is that we conduct community engagement. So we do workshops and we participate in events like this one and host other events to really connect people to the place and to the ocean, because you can't protect a place unless you know about it and generate kind of a love for it. So we gotta start there. And then our final thing that we do is we put a lot of energy into building relationships in this region. So that involves bringing together diverse groups, stakeholders and rights holders into a roundtable governance committee that we have for our project, but also trying to build relationships across communities and reach out to those who have been less engaged in the marine planning and stewardship dialogue thus far. So that might be industry, that might be Indigenous groups, that might be community residents, you name it. So all of those activities with the intent of supporting stewardship and management and planning. And yes, so I'm going to quickly walk through a little bit of the research portion now. So I mentioned we've been conducting research to create a tool, and that tool is essentially an online interactive map that visualizes a whole bunch of data about this region's ocean. I'm in a class right now at UBC, and on our first lecture, the teacher asked us to think about, close our eyes and envision the ocean, and just like what do we think of when we think of what the ocean means to us? And then she asked us, okay, how many of you are thinking about the surface of the ocean? How many of you are thinking about the coastline or a shoreline or the beach? And like most of us think about that, we're not as familiar with the depth of the ocean because it's out of sight. It's inaccessible to a lot of us. So that's why maps are a really great tool to use to kind of visualize what is actually out there in these deep areas. What do we know about which areas are important to animals and which areas are important to people? And so that's what our project is trying to do. It's overlaying all of that data and visualizing it in an accessible and publicly accessible tool. So I have this quick video that's a little bit of a sneak peek for the map, which is going to be publicly launched in June of this year. That will kind of walk us through how to use this tool and what I mean when I say interactive map. So is that video working okay? I hope so. I can't see anybody, so I'm just going to assume that it is. this video is showing us how to access different data layers. So right now we have Howe Sound, and I've just selected eelgrass data layer. So you can see that pink line is where we know eelgrass grows, and that's based off of mapping surveys that our group and others have done in this region over the past few years. So that's great, but what about if we want to know a little bit about human activities in this area? So we've gathered data in all of these categories, such as crown tenures and pollution. And this is the really neat thing. You can use this map to explore whatever data layers that you want. And the legend is there that can walk you through what those colors mean. This is a really quick overview. I can go into more detail afterwards. But we have over 300 data layers in this map right now, and we're still uploading some more. And yeah, it just kind of can help to give that regional context as well, because quite often data layers can be compartmentalized or held by different organizations. And it's nice to be able to bring them together and cross those jurisdictional boundaries or those institutional boundaries. The other thing that our map has is we have reports that we've embedded. So I just showed you how to go to the Ocean Watch report, and we'll have additional features in there that I can go into at another date, or like if you have specific questions, just reach out to me. So that's the beauty of maps and a bit of the research that we've been doing. In addition to that work, as I mentioned, we've been working a lot with the Squamish Nation and with youth from the nation on understanding how we can make this tool as meaningful to their community as possible and respectful of their knowledge and perspectives and stewardship and rights and title in this region. So last year we held a workshop to talk about stewardship, Indigenous-led stewardship programs, and the youth have been involved in kind of taking the resources we're creating and converting them into resources that are valuable to cultural education. So that might involve a bit of the place names that Victoria was talking about at the beginning and talking about cultural importance of different places in the region. And then some additional research that we're doing now is a series of interviews and a survey with community members to document places that are important to them for different reasons. And that is really helpful for bringing in the community knowledge and perspectives. Often marine spatial planning processes are led by kind of higher levels of government and can tend to be kind of quite top down, but we're lucky in the Sound because since it's such a small region relative to the entire BC coastline, we're able to do this more in-depth community engagement and really document and ensure that we're including community values, community knowledge, and community recommendations for how to be good stewards in this region. And I can speak a little bit more to that also if people have questions afterward. But at this point, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So moving away from the maps for the moment and talking through a little bit of a case study on one particular marine species that's really captivated me over the last few years. And that's a really great example of how research in this region is directly connecting to community stewardship and policymaking, specifically within the Gibson's Harbor. So this is eelgrass. I didn't know what eelgrass was until a few years ago, and I grew up in this region. So it's this beautiful plant that is important for so many different reasons. But as you can see, it forms these dense underwater meadows and this like kind of complex structural habitat. And that's important for supporting a whole bunch of different marine species. So on these blades of grass, I don't know if you can see in this one, there's a little bit of like fuzziness on the blade. So small plants grow on the eelgrass blades, and then small invertebrates like snails and crustaceans eat those little epiphytes. And then fish and birds eat the invertebrates, and it leads to this beautifully diverse underwater thriving life and ecosystem. Crabs are really a big fan of eelgrass as well. So if you like crabbing, protect the eelgrass. So eelgrass has that biological function of supporting diverse life, and we've documented over 400 species that make use of eelgrass in the Salish Sea. But eelgrass also performs a host of other services that are valuable to human communities. So first of all, we talked about climate change earlier. There's this thing called blue carbon, which essentially is a term that we use to talk about any carbon that's trapped and stored in the ocean as opposed to on land. So eelgrass is responsible for 10% of the oceanic carbon sequestration. So it's responsible for storing 10% of the carbon in the ocean. And it does that because it has these root systems. So eelgrass is a plant that actually evolved to live in the water from the land. So it's a vascular plant and it sends out rhizomes. If you're a gardener and you have strawberries, it kind of grows in that similar way. So it differs from seaweeds in that way. So we have that carbon storage, we have that biodiversity function, and then finally, eelgrass can provide other services that are nice for humans, such as stabilizing sediments. So when we live on the shoreline, you might be familiar with coastal erosion. When it's super stormy out and the waves just kind of eat away at the shoreline, eelgrass can help to break down a little bit of that wave energy, but more importantly, store and trap the sediment that gets all kind of like put into the water column by that wave energy and keep it in our bay so we don't just lose it to the deep water. So it's been estimated that through this diverse array of services, eelgrass in the Salish Sea provides $87,000 worth of ecosystem services per hectare per year. So that's a really neat stat to just kind of remind us of this one species value to us. Unfortunately, eelgrass is quite vulnerable to human impacts, kind of similar to glass sponge reefs and to other marine species. It's quite sensitive. So eelgrass likes to grow in shallow, quiet bays, which also tends to be where we like to explore and recreate as humans. And this picture is quite striking over here. So in this bay, the eelgrass is the dark part of the photo. The little white things are boats. And you can see that associated with each boat, there seems to be kind of this like halo or this circle of light seafloor. And that's caused by the scouring effect that mooring buoy chains have on the seafloor. When the boat kind of goes up and down with the tide and moves around, that chain rips apart the vegetation on the seafloor and forms these halos where seagrass and other species can no longer live. So this photo is really clearly highlighting the fragmentation of the habitat and the breaking up of that previously continuous eelgrass meadow due to the human infrastructure in this bay. But humans are smart, and we are able, in certain cases, to design our infrastructure to have a lower impact. So we have the technology that exists to suspend mooring buoy lines in the water column to avoid that impact, so that if, for example, we have a bay where it's impossible to anchor out of eelgrass, then we can use these designs to stay within the eelgrass, but lower our footprint and lower our negative impact on that ecosystem. Obviously, the ideal is that you don't anchor in eelgrass bed because there's other impacts that you can have. You know, you might pollute from your boat, or you might be shading the eelgrass. But worst comes to worst, if you have no other options, there are ways to have a lower impact. And Sea Change is actually installing a few pilots of these mooring buoy designs in Mannion Bay on Bowen Island. We're doing a few other things in the region to protect eelgrass that I can speak to later, maybe. So getting back to mapping, I mentioned that the Marine Reference Guide's been, one of our goals is to fill knowledge gaps. So in the 2017 Howe Sound Ocean Watch report, it identified that a survey had been done of the distribution of eelgrass around the islands in the Sound and Gibson's. But we had this big knowledge gap where we didn't have any data for the distribution of eelgrass along the whole mainland periphery of the Sound, except for Gibson's. So in September of 2019, this wonderful team of researchers and I set out to map the distribution of eelgrass along the mainland shore. And then with another team in Gibson's, we mapped the Gibson's distribution with Diane Sanford, if any of you know her. And that was wonderful because now we have this more comprehensive data set of eelgrass that forms a good baseline for any further monitoring and development that happens in the region. We use this underwater camera. And it was neat for me because, as I mentioned before, a couple years ago, I wasn't that familiar with eelgrass, and I've kind of been going on this learning journey about its value. But this fieldwork was really what showed me its value. Majority of the Sound's seafloor is rocky, and it is either very steep or, yeah, just kind of like a rocky seafloor. It doesn't have that much complex 3D habitat. And then you get to these eelgrass stretches, and it's all of a sudden just this like lush, incredible. It's like going from rocky barrens to intense forests where you're just, it's so clear that value that it provides to marine life. So that was a really cool experience. And wonderfully, the town of Gibson's, and with the help of the Marine Education Center and other regional partners, is now making use of this data, this mapping data, to inform policy and management plan development for the Gibson's Harbour. So Graham can probably speak to that more, but it's been wonderful to see the direct connection between this mapping data. So these colors here are where eelgrass exists in the town of Gibson's Harbour, and the different colors are associated with the different years that we did those surveys. This information is now being talked about and used to inform some planning and management conversations in this region. So I'm pumped about that. That's really inspiring for me as a researcher to see people willing to, take up this information and use it to inform their work. And then this picture here is from a restoration event that was held on Bowen Island last year in 2019, I guess a year and a half ago now. And that's part of the Sea Change project that Graham mentioned, where we've been doing eelgrass restorations throughout the Sound, in addition to subtidal debris removals in a few places like Gibson's Harbour and Plumbers Cove on Keats Island, all in an effort to restore the health of our nearshore waters and help people kind of make that connection that we have a role to play in taking care of these underwater gardens and making sure that we fulfill our roles and our responsibilities as stewards, respectful stewards of this region. So that kind of provides an overview and a summary of some of the projects that I've been involved in this region. There's a lot more to say about all of those, about marine spatial planning, about ecological research, about restoration and stewardship, about the role of community members. But I'd love to just leave you with the thought and the reminder that strong connections to place inspires and fosters stewardship actions by communities, sectors, and governments, and Howe Sound is living proof of this fact. The crazy experience and arc of our region's ocean, it really is inspiring, and it's a good reminder that all is not lost, and humans have the ability to put energy into recovering the health of an ecosystem, and that can provide so much value to our communities and to our well-being. But also that we have to remain vigilant with those actions and with that stewardship work, and continue to seek out ways that we can ensure that research and knowledge is connecting to the people and the groups who can mobilize it. So there's a lot of grassroots and bottom-up opportunities to doing that work, and that's where I get a lot of energy and excitement, and I'd love to hear any of your thoughts for those who joined on the call today for ways that we can continue that work here and elsewhere in the region. So with that, I'd like to thank you for hosting me and for listening this evening, and extend a huge thank you to all of the diverse partners and groups who are involved in this work. There's almost too many to mention in this project, but if you want to learn more about these groups, please do reach out to me, or you can visit the website. It's howesoundguide.ca, and that's where you can find more information. So yeah, at this point, I'd love to open it up to a conversation, a dialogue. Feel free to turn your cameras back on if you like, and we can kind of get going. I think there's been some comments in the chat, so that's awesome to go through. But yeah, thank you very much.
Fiona, that was totally great. Everybody is very excited, I can see in the chat room. So people, if you want to ask a question out loud, maybe we'll try unmuting yourself and turning your video on and seeing if you can do that. And if you want to just put it in the chat, then do that. So I'll just give a few seconds of space here to see what kind of conversation this inspires. I get a lot of chance to talk to you, so I'll take a back seat here.
Fiona, I'm Charles, and I'm currently in Puerto Vallarta. Thank you so very much. That was very enlightening. I'm a sailor, and I sail the Salish Sea. That sounds cool. Thank you so much, and I'll be careful where I anchor.
Awesome, glad to hear. Thank you for that word. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Fiona. I don't know if you can hear me or not. My name's Deborah Greaves, and I am a proud volunteer for the Nicholas Sonntag Marine Education Center. I felt that before COVID came and rearranged everything, that we as a group were making a slow but very sure change in the way people were talking about sea creatures. I always felt that the problem was that everyone forgot about the sea creatures because you can't see them. They're hiding underneath the surface, and only when the big mammals come up, people would think about them. And I thought that the Marine Education Center was really doing some wonderful things and just reminding people that there are living beings underneath the water that the ferry passes over. And I think that slowly a lot of people in Gibson's were becoming more and more sensitive to that. And it's been very exciting. And the work that you're doing, I think, will make a huge difference. And it's great to have you talking about that today so that people in Gibson's can share that kind of information with visitors and people who care.
Thank you very much for that comment. Yeah, I agree. I think that that's the tragedy of the ocean in a way. It can be out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. And unless, you have the opportunity to get out on the water, it can be hard to establish that connection. Although there's a lot of other ways that are happening virtually right now. I mean, planet Earth is just one way that people can connect to environments and ecosystems that they have no opportunity to travel to. But yeah, I feel that too, that people in this region are really growing their connection to different species, and there's so much education happening, which is really great. I see a ton of questions in the chat. I don't know, Graham and Victoria, do you guys have any recommendations for how we want to work through that?
Well, we can shoot some out here. There's a few about the Howe Sound Biosphere Region Initiative, and I know that you and Ruth are probably very close. So why don't you speak to that project and how you're helping?
Definitely. Yeah, so that's great. I'm glad that people brought that up. The Howe Sound Biosphere Region Initiative is an initiative to designate Howe Sound as a UNESCO biosphere, which is a designation that essentially draws recognition that this region is important from an ecological perspective, and also from the way that people behave and act in this region. And it's an example to the world of sustainable development and sustainable practices. So that's kind of the intention behind the biosphere designation. And the biosphere movement itself is led by a woman named Ruth Simons, and the goal of it is to really bring people together and start to get us operating as a region rather than as kind of separate entities, and ensure that we're doing that collective learning and that knowledge sharing so that we share best practices, if that's like stewardship or development oriented, so that we really do demonstrate that really strong, effective, sustainable development. And it involves building relationships, it involves doing research and educating groups, it involves building collaboration. So we work with the biosphere. The research that we're doing forms or supports a lot of the biosphere's nomination process, and can help build those foundations that have to do with ocean. But the biosphere has a terrestrial component as well. So a lot of the work that we're doing is kind of supporting that ocean part and then indirectly supporting the terrestrial component as well. Our study area boundary is the same as the biosphere. It's also the same as the province's cumulative effects framework analysis. So some of the data layers that we have in our map draw from that study, but you can just Google it, province cumulative effects Howe Sound, and you'll see that the province conducted an assessment of different activities in the sound and how they impact terrestrial indicators, species like marbled murrelets and grizzlies and elk. Yes, but yeah, the Biosphere is a great organization, does a ton of community building and collaboration, and we're grateful to be working with them.
Victoria, do you want to read out a few of the other questions?
Yeah, for sure. So Pam says, hi Fiona, we really enjoyed your presentation and your passion for Howe Sound. We are recreational boaters and we have noticed a steady buildup of logs in Plumper. Continued Plumper's Cove, is this a risk to the health of the ocean? And if so, what can be done?
That's a great question. Yeah, so logs can build up along shorelines when they come loose from log booms, as log booms are transported or as they're stored. And I'm sure there's some folks on this call who know the forestry industry more intimately than I do. But speaking from an ecological perspective, some logs on the shore are fine. You know, trees falling and traveling down rivers and entering the ocean and ending up on the shoreline is a part of our natural systems. The aggregation and the accumulation of a lot of logs on the shoreline, though, can lead to some problems because when the tide comes up and down, those logs move up and down and they can crush habitat, so plants that might be growing along the shoreline. They can also crush fish embryos. So some forage fish species lay their eggs on beaches. Sand lance and surf smelt are two of those in Howe Sound that make use of the beaches as spawning grounds. And logs can crush those embryos, which is really unfortunate because then all the fish die. So that's not great. And naturally, when trees fall, they have the root balls attached to them, which prevents them from logging or from rolling as much. Whereas trees that we've cut down and harvested for forestry don't have those roots, so that's why they roll around a lot more. But yeah, I'm not too sure on like what the actions are to remediate that effect, other than, you know, you can do beach restoration, and that might involve moving some of the logs or placing them more strategically, or maybe placing some rocks around them so they don't roll, or it might involve beachcombing, but I'm less familiar with that.
Great. We have another question here from GTV1. Says, thank you, Fiona. I have a 7-year-old kiddo on the Zoom call with us today. Any advice to our family on how to get him involved and learning about the ocean? He loves the ocean and knows so much about the animals that live in it. I want to encourage him to learn more and stay involved.
That's such a great question. Well, I'm sure that as an education center, you guys have ideas for educational resources to point kids towards. My thought is just like getting out on the water as much as you can and, you know, learning about the species, taking photos, documenting changes, interacting with crabs. Like there's so much marine life that you can foster a connection to just by going out and walking around on the beach and then learning about that at home. But yeah, getting that hands-on exposure as a kid is so important. And then there's just so many resources. I can point you towards, I mean, the Ocean Watch report did come out with an educational package for, I think, older students though, I think grade 7 or 8. So it might be a little bit old for the 7-year-old, but definitely check out that website. And yeah, I'm sure you guys have resources you can point them towards, but just photos. I don't know, maybe get a camera and document changes that you see on your beach. If you go out every month and take a picture of the same spot, you'll be so surprised to see how it changes over time.
Those are great suggestions. And if you live in the Gibsons area, come visit us at the aquarium. We're open on the weekends. Additionally, we do summer camps that are perfect for age 7. And Graham has put our newsletter link in there so you can get more updates on how that programming is going to be offered this year. I'm going to read a couple more questions here. So Jacqueline asks, is there a relationship between eelgrass and herring spawn? If so, can you briefly describe? Thanks.
Oh, that's such a great question. So yes, there is. Herring can spawn on eelgrass. So I showed you, I'll zoom actually back to that slide because it's a really beautiful photo. Just give me 1 second. This photo is, you can see the herring have spawned on this seaweed. This is fucus or rockweed. And the herring will lay their eggs on like anything when they're spawning. It's pretty cool. On seaweed, on eelgrass, on rocks, on pilings if they're wrapped. They do spawn on eelgrass, and the Hesquiat Nation, actually, their name comes from the sh sound that when they pull the herring eggs off of the eelgrass, it makes that sound. So that's the origin of that nation's nation name. It's derived from the association between herring eggs and eelgrass. So that's a really neat connection. Yeah, so eelgrass provides that substrate for herring eggs, and then other animals can eat the herring eggs, or the herring eggs can develop, and as the eelgrass moves around in the water column, it's important habitat there.
That's so cool. Peter Grant has a question. What is the mapping technology you use for the mapping, and when will it be publicly available, and how can it be accessed? Also, is your project working with younger people in schools?
Yes, all three. So the Marine Reference Guide's objective is to create publicly accessible tools. So our website is howsoundguide.ca, and in June, that's when we'll be launching our map. So the video that I shared during the presentation will be launched publicly in June and accessible from that point on. There's actually already an online interactive map available for Howe Sound, though, that the David Suzuki Foundation and Oceanwise produced a year and a half ago, which is conservation oriented. So you can reach that at howsoundconservation.ca. I can pop both of those links in the map. And in terms of the mapping technology that we use, well, to create those maps, they're based on an Esri map, interactive map platform. So Esri is the organization who kind of like provides that software. But for doing the mapping itself, the surveying work, that varies depending on what you're talking about. So a lot of the data we gathered from people who already have that, like governments or organizations. And then for some of the data layers that we've created through our projects, we did that underwater survey of the eelgrass. We're doing a plankton survey in partnership with some of the folks on this call this year, and that's, again, ecological fieldwork. And then with the community members, we're writing out on maps places that are important to them. So that's handwritten maps that we then digitize and convert into shapefiles, GIS shapefiles. To get to your second question about our young people involved in the project, yeah, we work with, as I mentioned, there's 3 youth from the Squamish Nation who work with us, and younger people in schools and high school. So the youth have been involved. Their objective is to engage Indigenous youth. So 2 years ago, we did several activities and field trips with youth from the nation to visit culturally important sites in the region. And then through our engagement projects, we've been working with schools up in Squamish to kind of share videos and information about different marine species in the Sound. We had this event on World Oceans Day last year associated with the Squamish Wave of Change, where we just helped facilitate some ocean education opportunities. And then we've been doing a few storytelling events where we share stories about a place. Our first one last year was for Howe Sound, and we're doing one next week actually focused on Mannion Bay on Bowen Island. And students from the schools on Bowen have done some projects and visited Mannion Bay, taken photos, and they're sharing that as a part of our community event of storytelling. So we love engaging with youth. That is a huge priority for us because it's a great way to kind of like inspire that generational stewardship.
Wonderful. Beatrice, age 4, is wondering if there are different species of eelgrass, and if so, how many?
Nice question. That's so great. Thank you for joining, Beatrice. I'm really pumped to hear from you and your sisters. So There's two main species of eelgrass that we find in the Salish Sea. The one that I talked about today is a native eelgrass, and the Latin name for it is Zostro Japonica. And that one you find kind of deeper in the water. So if it's a really low tide, then you can maybe see some eelgrass, some Zostro Japonica. And if you're a diver or a swimmer, when you're swimming out in the water, then you'll probably be interacting with that species. But there's another species that lives in this area called Zostro Japonica, and it came over from Japan. It's a non-native species, and it occupies a slightly different habitat on the beach. So it grows in the shallower beach or intertidal zone, and it looks a little bit different than Zostro Japonica. It's skinnier blades, and it doesn't grow as tall. Now, thankfully, since those two species occupy different areas, they don't compete. So it's not a native species, but it's not what we call an invasive species, which is when there's a species that isn't from the area that competes and impedes the native species' health and ability to grow and live. So yeah, there's two main species of eelgrass. There's, in our region. So great question.
Okay, great. There's lots of really great comments in the chat as well. I'm sure you're taking a look, Fiona. Errol asked to post the video link in the chat. I think he might be referring to a video link about the maps, but I'm not sure. Errol, which video link do you mean?
If it's the mapping link, that's actually just it's just like a desktop video that I made, so I don't have a link to it necessarily, but I can make sure that, the best, what we're going to do is embed a tutorial video in our map when we launch it so that people can see how to use it. So that'll be publicly available at that point. I think that's the best answer.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question, Errol. Yeah, the mapping link for the video. Okay, great. Yeah, lots of people are asking about where to find the interactive maps. I see that Melanie Knight put a link in here. I think that's probably the same one. And then, really excited to see more.
Yes.
Graham, you want to read some more questions out?
Yeah, I want to read the question from Michelle. Thanks for the great chat, she says. If this is the Michelle McDonald's, I think she is. That it is. She's an excellent engineer. Engineers helped us out before with our biofilter situation. What would your recommendation be for volunteer opportunities for people who are interested in getting involved in the space as MEC opportunities, of course, also in Greater Vancouver area? How can people contribute in this space today, perhaps that aligns with the action plan? So, like there's an audience in here that's from the coast, come to the aquarium. Of course, we can help you out and get involved for direct impact conservation, but also when they're for the Metro Vancouver area, what kind of recommendations do you have, Fiona?
That's a great question. So I would, the first place that I would point you toward is the Biosphere, the Howe Sound Biosphere, because that's one of the functions that they want to do, is be a point source for people to go to if they want to get involved in the region. And the Biosphere actually, a couple months ago, started producing this quarterly conservation newsletter, which identifies volunteer opportunities in it. So that's a great resource that you can sign up for, that it will pop into your mailbox 4 times a year, and you can see, current events, what's happening, because this region is, oh my God, the number of groups who work here is crazy. And there's people doing pretty much anything that you can think of. And I think the majority of them are interested in volunteers. So that conservation letter, I think, would help to gain familiarity with who's out there and what they're up to. And the Biosphere is a great place. If you have a specific activity that you're interested in, like say research or restoration or community engagement, that's good to let people know. And that can also help you to identify the right organization for you. Another resource that the Marine Reference Guide is creating, but we haven't launched publicly yet as well, is a map called a community network map. And that's going to be kind of an inventory or a phone book of the groups who work in the sound associated with the ocean. And that's going to include non-profit groups, but also education groups and industry groups and government groups and consultants and media, anyone really who has some sort of connection to the ocean. So that'll also be a cool place, like a one-stop shop for being like, who is who in this area? Who might I want to work with? And that will be launched in June as well. So I'm just kind of scrolling through these questions as well. I see Ralph has one about seeing the impact of microplastic in the Sound's waters. That's a really good question. I'm sure that many of you on the call are familiar with ocean plastics and the problems that it presents to marine life. So with ocean plastics, we have a couple different categories. Microplastics is the category of the really small plastics that are less than 5 millimeters in size. So they can be what's called primary microplastics, which is when it's those plastic nurdles or the little pellets that are used in manufacturing that can spill from barges as they're being transported, or secondary microplastics, which are when bigger plastic items break down in the ocean into smaller pieces. And that's the key thing with plastic. When it ends up in the ocean, it doesn't really go away. It just breaks up into smaller pieces, and sometimes so small that we stop seeing them. So we think that they've gone away, but they're there. They're there. And microplastics are everywhere. They're everywhere in our global ocean. They're up in the Arctic, they're in the Antarctic, they're in Howe Sound. It's pretty pervasive at this point. But the extent to which they're impacting marine life negatively is still being researched. So microplastics can impact filter feeders, like invertebrates such as mussels, for example, who suck in water and then they eat the plankton and they spit out the stuff they don't want. Microplastics are kind of the same size as plankton. So there's a concern that for filter feeders, microplastics are going to get into their digestive system and are getting into their digestive system and impacting their ability to eat and grow. Marine birds is something that's been really well documented, where the birds eat the plastic and then their stomachs are full of plastic and they die of starvation. So that's not so great. So with plastic, the main message is, if you can avoid using plastic, you should. So go for alternative materials wherever possible. If that's not possible, then make sure that you're recycling them and reusing the plastics, and just being attentive to where that plastic is going. Make sure it's going into your recycling bin, you're cleaning it, you're sorting it properly so that we can try to recycle and reuse those materials rather than them ending up in the landfill or worse, the environment. But yeah, reduce plastic consumption and pick up plastic if you see it on the beach. Oh, there's so many comments. I feel like I can't scroll through them fast enough, but thank you all for your really positive thoughts.
Just to add on to that last question, I'm just going to put the link to the NESMEC YouTube channel in the chat. Our first speaker in this series was Garth Coverton, who's a PhD student at the University of Victoria, and he did a whole talk on microplastics. So that's what he's researching, microplastics in the marine environment. So if you're interested in learning more, it was very educational and informative.
Mm-hmm. 2 quick questions I can see in there. Does the map include salmon information, i.e. spawning? Yes, we do have information on streams and rivers in the Sound that are salmon spawning streams. And then the other question, is the biosphere the same as the tl'ka7tsem Biosphere Trust, or am I on the wrong track? No, you're right. It's the same designation, different places though. So biospheres operate in different ways wherever they are. They all have slightly different mandates and objectives. So the tl'ka7tsem Biosphere Trust is for Barkly and tl'ka7tsem Sound, and that has a distinct mandate than, or I actually don't think it's Barkly Sound as well, it's just tl'ka7tsem and Tofino area. They have a different focus than, say, the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region, which is on Vancouver Island as well, and then the Howe Sound one will be once it becomes designated.
I had a question about forestry and the recovery of Howe Sound. And we talked a little bit about how the biosphere is larger, is the whole watershed region, and a lot of the work you've been doing is ocean focused, and there's this upland and terrestrial component. It's always interesting to speak to the interconnection between the watershed and the ocean and the forest. What kind of cool projects or innovations are you seeing in the way that forestry's managed to improve ocean health?
That's a great question. and a very complex one. And I should say that I'm not a studier of forestry necessarily. So a lot of my knowledge from that field is just coming from interacting with people and learning rather than from like the science itself. But definitely forestry has a huge impact on marine life because forestry activities change the way that watersheds work, and they can alter the amount of precipitation and runoff that flows into streams that then flow into the ocean. So that's one impact that forestry can have. And foresters have changed their practices a lot over time to reduce that negative impact and to kind of try to, I think, maintain the integrity of watersheds. But that'll differ where you are. So I can't necessarily speak to how well the companies in Howe Sound are doing compared to the companies on Vancouver Island. But that is one change that's happening. Another impact that forestry has is when they store logs along the shoreline. Log booms, when they're stored there over time, the logs rub together and woody debris falls, like the bark and the twigs falls from the logs onto the floor, and it collects there over time. And when you get a collection of woody debris on the seafloor, it creates an anoxic environment, which means there's no oxygen because the wood slowly, it starts to biodegrade a little bit, and then all the bacteria that are eating the wood take up all the oxygen, and the oxygen disappears, which means that you've smothered the ground and then you've turned it into a toxic environment and nothing can grow. And the problem is that when you remove the logs from the top, that environment doesn't change. So it's quite a long-term impact from log booming practices. And what we've seen in some places is that foresters logging companies are changing the location of the log booms. Some of them, I've seen them move them a little bit offshore into deeper water, but that's only possible if the places where they're storing their logs are calm enough that their log booms are still protected. But that would be one option I can see, or just being very attentive to where the log boom tenures are permitted so that you don't permit log booming in a place where there's sensitive habitat, such as an estuary or a place where eelgrass is growing. So that is important, and that's something that decision makers have a responsibility to control and to regulate.
So for someone who didn't know very much about something you certainly knew, you certainly did a great job describing a couple of really key issues, which has, been the theme throughout the night. We were all really impressed with your knowledge and the way that you communicate your knowledge. There's been a couple of comments here just about, I guess, how thankful people are to see this optimism in the younger generation. So maybe to sort of end or bring things to a close, what are a few things that you're really optimistic about on the horizon, right? This is what we do need to also, go to bed feeling good. So what kind of stories, what are the good stories?
That's a great question. Okay, well, the good stories start from home. So for me, like getting to know the people who are doing the work in this region and talking to people about how they value the ocean, that's the best possible remedy to all of the crazy tragedy and mess in the world, I think. When I get overwhelmed with climate change, I think about what people are doing here to protect eelgrass and to reduce emissions and to just like change their behavior. And that's what inspires me and keeps me going. So I think that that's a huge message to people. It's so easy to get down about the world, but we have a lot of incredible energy in this region. And I'm sure if you go to any community and neighborhood in the world, there is that hope and there is that positivity. You just have to look for it a little bit. So doing that work to talk to people and to get out. Most people want a healthy ocean and a healthy environment. Most people don't want to be living in a polluted mess. So there is lots of energy going forward. And then, yeah, I don't know. I see as like, there's so many young people who are doing this work, and it is so wonderful to be in places where there's people across generations who can share their wisdom and their energy. Every age has a different thing to bring to the table. And I just encourage people, I guess, to try to work across diverse ages and diverse communities as much as we can so that we can bring those different strengths together in our solutions and change making. Awesome. I feel like I want to save the chat because I didn't get to read a lot of things, but yeah, thank you everybody for your comments. It's really meaningful and wonderful to hear your thoughts. I wish we could be in person because it's always so weird to end talks with just like Zoom silence. But I really value you coming out tonight and listening to what we have to say.
Well, Victoria, do you have anything else to wrap up here?
I just want to say that I think you've done a really good job of highlighting intergenerational knowledge and the importance of education coming from so many different sections. I think that we've heard from so many great speakers so far, but being able to really highlight that, I don't know, it just leaves me being hopeful, and I really appreciate all of your work, Fiona. It's definitely inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you very much. I think everybody should clap for you.
Thank you very much. Fiona.
We also wish to honor you with an annual family pass to the Nicholas Sontag Marine Education Center. So Victoria will be in touch with you later. If you want to gift that, pay that forward to somebody you know in the coast, but you're always welcome to come up anyway. We really enjoy, I can speak for the team, Jenny, Victoria, Emily, Kevin. We really enjoy spending time and talking to you and being connected to these broader projects in the Lower Mainland.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love visiting the Marine Education Center too, and seeing you all. All right, well, have a great night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good evening.